Loneliness is a strange companion. It walks with us in silence. It waits at the edges of crowded rooms. It lingers long after the noise fades and the lights go out. The pain of absence, of not being seen, of not being known. It feels like a void, like a hollow space inside your chest that no amount of activity, affection, or distraction can fill. And the world tells you to fix it, scroll it away. It opens our hearts to the possibility that we are not alone in our loneliness, the belief that we can fill our own void, the fantasy that another person can complete us, or that success can heal us. Loneliness breaks these illusions, the quiet space where the false self crumbles, and the true self begins to breathe, not to punish us but to purify us, to prepare us, that even in our most silent suffering, we are being drawn gently, painfully, beautifully toward the one who never leaves. Work it away, medicate it. His life was marked by grief, distance, and longing. He lost his mother as a child. He lived through war. He experienced deep intellectual isolation. And yet from that pain came clarity. From that silence came voice. From that loneliness came the kind of love that doesn't fade. Entertain it, hide it. You can be surrounded by people and still feel utterly alone. You can have conversations all day and still feel unheard. You can be loved and still ache. C.S. Lewis understood this ache. He knew that loneliness was not just a psychological state, it was a spiritual signal. A collie would say, "Be still. Listen," because loneliness is not a mistake, it's a message. It means your soul is paying attention. It means something holy is stirring beneath the surface, a kind of hunger that pointed beyond this world. We fear silence. We avoid solitude. Lewis wrote, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." Loneliness, then, is not just the absence of others, it's the echo of eternity. It is the ache for a kind of intimacy, a kind of homecoming, that this world cannot fully give. We crave validation, stimulation, connection, at all costs. But in doing so, we often miss the very thing our hearts most need. The sacred experience of being alone with ourselves, of meeting our own soul without the mask, without the noise, without the performance. In his writings, he spoke of it often. It brings us face to face with parts of ourselves we've been avoiding, our wounds, our doubts, our longings, and most terrifying of all, our emptiness. But Lewis believed that this emptiness was not meaningless. He believed it was a signpost, a signal that we were made for something more, not as something to be numbed or escaped, but as something to be listened to be honored. Because, in loneliness, something deep awakens. At first, what awakens is pain, but Lewis would tell you something different. We live in a culture terrified of loneliness. That meeting is uncomfortable, in the weight of glory. And that ache is sacred, because it leads us inward, it leads us upward. But before that can happen, something must die. The illusion that we are self-sufficient. Lewis knew this process well, because loneliness is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. It is the doorway, the refining fire. Loneliness, when we stop resisting it, becomes a teacher. Not a gentle one, but a necessary one. It strips us. It humbles us. It places us in front of a mirror and asks, the voice of the soul, the voice of God. And that discovery often begins with discomfort, because the first thing we notice in solitude is not peace, but pain. The pain of unmet longings, the ache of abandonment. It longs for what is eternal, and loneliness exposes how much of our lives are built on the temporary, that it prepared the soul for something greater than comfort. Communion, not shallow connection, but deep union with oneself, with others, with the divine. And this union cannot be fabricated. It must be cultivated. It must be grown in the soil of silence, watered by patience, and rooted in truth. The fragile likes, followers, accolades, image, control. These things cannot sustain a soul. And when they fall away, what remains? The sting of memories we've buried beneath business. Who are you when no one else is watching? And most of us don't know. Not the polished truth of our public lives, but the raw, unedited truth of who we are and what we carry. The truth of our fears, our regrets, our doubts, our hidden hopes. And only in the presence of that truth can healing begin. We've built our identities around relationships, roles, achievements, and applause. But what's left when all of that is silent, but shouts in our pains? It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. We must stop demanding that loneliness leave. We must stop seeing it as a flaw to be fixed or a punishment to be avoided. We must begin to see it as a refining fire, one that burns away the superficial and reveals the sacred. Loneliness, then, is not God's absence, it's often his megaphone. Not because he enjoys our pain, but because our pain awakens our attention. It opens a space where real transformation can happen. Only what is eternal, only what can stand in silence and not shatter. C.S. Lewis believed that this silence, the stillness of being alone, was not emptiness, but invitation. An invitation to discover the voice beneath the noise, but in that ache is truth. Lewis wrote that God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but that transformation requires surrender. because the soul cannot be filled with shallow things, only what is real. This is why Lewis did not fear solitude. He knew that it had a purpose, and the truth is this: you are not alone in your loneliness. Even in your silence, you are being seen. Even in your ache, you are being held. God is not waiting for you on the other side of your loneliness, He is waiting for you within it. In the space where your defenses fall, where your distractions fade, where your soul finally says, I'm listening. And in that listening, something shifts. You stop chasing, you start receiving, you stop performing, you start resting. You begin to understand that loneliness is not a punishment, but a passage, not a curse, but a corridor, not the end, but the opening. It's the space where the false self dies and the true self awakens, where you stop trying to be enough and start realizing you already are, where you stop looking for someone else to complete you and start allowing God to fill you. This is the secret the saints and mystics knew. That solitude is not the absence of love, it is the preparation for it. That the deepest connections are not built by avoiding our loneliness, but by honoring it. And that sometimes God removes every other voice, so we can finally hear His. Loneliness often feels like a void in emptiness, aching to be filled. And the world is quick to offer fillers, romantic fantasy, surface-level friendships, endless noise, numbing habits, anything to distract from the ache. Anything to avoid the silence. But what if the ache itself is the beginning of something sacred? In the Four Loves, he explores how each kind of love, affection, friendship, eros, charity points beyond itself to something divine. And it is only when love becomes an act of worship, not a grasping for security, that it becomes real. Cslewis believed that love was never meant to be a remedy for loneliness. It was meant to be a reflection of something greater. It's meant to be offered from the sacred place that your loneliness created. Like two souls who have already met themselves in solitude, now meeting each other in truth. There is no pressure to perform, no fear of loss, no grasping, only presence. That when you allow yourself to be emptied of illusions, of false identities, of desperate attachments, you make space for something real, something eternal, a mirror of divine reality. And in order to love well, we must first learn to be alone well. Not in bitterness, not in self-pity. Let it clear the ground of your heart. Let it break the shallow patterns. Let it deepen your roots. Because in that empty space, God is forming something sacred. Because once they are exposed, they can be healed. And as they are healed, our love becomes freer, truer. After a life marked by grief and quiet yearning, he met Joy Davidman. Their love was brief, but profound. Because you are no longer seeking a person to complete. You are seeking to share what God has already made complete within you. Not the end of loneliness, but the fruit of it. It was not a love that saved him from loneliness, but one that met him in the middle of it. A love that shared in the aching. A love that deepened his faith, not distracted from it. A love rooted in eternity, not escape. Less about what we can get and more about what we can give. Most people approach love as a solution. If I find the right person, I won't feel empty. But when love is used to escape loneliness, it becomes possessive. Because in solitude, we begin to face the lies we've believed about ourselves. Lies like, I'm unlovable unless I perform. I'm alone because I'm broken. No one will choose me if they see the real me. These beliefs run deep, and they shape how we love. They make us anxious, defensive, controlling, or avoidant, demanding, fragile. It seeks to take, not to give. It clings out of fear, not out of freedom, and ultimately it cannot last. But in wholeness, because the heart that has learned to sit in solitude is the heart that is ready to offer love not from need, but from fullness. This is a radical shift. True love, Lewis wrote, is not about the self being completed by another. It is about the self being lifted toward the eternal through another. But this kind of love requires a transformation that only solitude can bring. And yet, in the silence of loneliness, these lies begin to surface, not to shame us but to free us. You begin to understand that love is not meant to fix your loneliness. And then, when love comes, it doesn't feel like salvation. It feels like resonance. This is the kind of love Lewis longed for and eventually found. And this is the paradox. The more comfortable you become in solitude, the more capable you become of love. So when loneliness lingers, don't rush to fill it. Sit with it, listen to it, let it do its work. A love that gives instead of grasps. A love that blesses instead of demands. A love that reflects eternity instead of feeding insecurity. And when that love finally arrives, whether in friendship, romance, or divine encounter, it will not feel like rescue. It will feel like harmony. Because loneliness, when honored, always leads to love. There is a sacredness to the silence of solitude that few are willing to endure. It's not glamorous. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't shout for attention. But beneath its stillness lies the deepest transformation a human soul can undergo. Because only in that silence do we finally hear what noise was drowning out all along. The voice of God. Cslewis wrote with honesty about the hiddenness of God, the sense that sometimes, especially in suffering, heaven feels silent. But he never concluded that God was absent. Rather, He believed that God often draws us into that silence not to abandon us, but to awaken us, to tune our ears to frequencies the world has muted, to prepare us for the kind of presence that doesn't entertain but transforms. Loneliness, when embraced with reverence, becomes a sanctuary, a holy space where distractions die, pretenses fall, and the soul stands bare before the divine. And in that place, stripped of all the things we thought defined us, we begin to remember who we truly are. Not performers, not achievers, to be validated. The ego cannot survive in true aloneness because it feeds on external reaction, and so it resists silence. It panics in stillness. It screams in loneliness. Not consumers, but children, because they threaten the entire system of image and noise. But they are the very questions that awaken calling, that peel away illusion, that place us on the narrow path not of success, but of meaning, because it speaks from the center of what most of us try to avoid. It doesn't offer quick answers. It offers presence. It doesn't deny the ache, it honors it. And in doing so, it reminds us that loneliness is not a deterrent, is often the doorway to destiny, grounds us. His greatest works were born in seasons of solitude, contemplation, and loss. Books like The Problem of Pain and A Grief Observed didn't come from triumph, but from wrestling, from silence. We numb, distract, overcome it, or compromise just to feel something other than the ache. But in doing so, we miss the transformation. We escape the pain, but also the purpose, because purpose is not found in escape. It is found in engagement. From holy loneliness aligns us with something greater than ourselves. It's a quiet kind of purpose, often invisible, often misunderstood. To sit with the ache instead of fleeing it, we will find that the silence is not empty. It is full of whisper, full of presence, full of the seeds of something eternal, but unmistakably real. A clearing, a holy ground, a womb for something new, a sacred pause, where identity is no longer something we manufacture but something we receive. Beloved, eternal, sanctifies us, and ultimately, in this solitude, the ego begins to lose its grip, the ego that always needs to prove, to be admired, to be in control. But the soul knows better. The soul recognizes that what feels like emptiness is actually spaciousness, and in that space, purpose begins to stir. Not the kind of purpose that boosts our image or feeds our ambition, but the kind that roots us, because in loneliness, we begin to ask the deeper questions. Who am I, really? What have I been chasing? What matters when no one is looking? What would I still do, even if no one ever applauded? These are questions the world doesn't want us to ask. Clewis's life was a testimony to this path. He was never driven by fame or acceptance, and this is why his voice still resonates. But we must stay long enough to hear the invitation. Too often we rush through loneliness as if it were a fire escape, and the first place we must engage is the silence, not to figure it out, not to control it, but to trust it, to trust that what feels like emptiness is actually divine design, that what feels like isolation is actually incubation, that what feels like waiting is actually preparation. God often does his deepest work in the quiet, in the hidden, in the places no one else sees. And if we are willing to stay, if we are willing, because in the end, loneliness is not just something we endure, it is something that shapes us. Loneliness, when consecrated, becomes not a punishment but a pilgrimage. It is not the desert we are meant to die in. It is the wilderness we must walk through to become who we were born to be. Every soul called by God into something deeper, truer, and eternal must, at some point, be led into the wilderness of loneliness, not as a cruel exile, but as a sacred encounter. This is not new, it is the rhythm of Scripture. Moses met God not in the palace but in the solitude of the mountain. Elijah heard the whisper of God not in the storm but in the silence of the cave. Jesus withdrew into lonely places not because he lacked, but because he longed to be with the Father. Paul was shaped more by his prison solitude than his public sermons. And you are not abandoned. You are being invited. Cslewis understood this invitation well. He knew that pain and loneliness were not interruptions to life's meaning, but often the very vessels through which meaning was forged. He once wrote, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience but shouts in our pain. And when we listen, truly listen, we realize that the voice in our pain is not always demanding answers. It's calling us home. Home to what truly matters. Home to what endures. Home to the God who is not far off, but near to the brokenhearted. This home is not found in escape, but in embrace. Not in noise, but in stillness. Not in applause, but in quiet faithfulness. And in doing so, he helped a generation rediscover the holiness of human longing. That aching itself can be sacred when it points us to what is beyond this world. It does not perform, but it holds, and it sustains, and it begins to whisper a deeper truth. Lewis's genius was not just in his intellect, it was in his surrender. He didn't write to impress, he wrote to heal. It tells us we were made for something eternal, something that the world cannot offer, and that's why the world cannot comfort us, because at the center of all loneliness is a longing that no earthly thing can satisfy. And that longing is not weakness, it's signal, and yet there is comfort but not the kind we expect. Not comfort that removes the ache, but comfort that meets us in it. Not comfort that distracts, but comfort that transforms. A presence, a knowing, a peace that passes understanding. This peace is not loud. You are not alone. You never were, even in the silence, even in the ache, even in the darkest night, because in that darkness, something sacred happens. Our eyes adjust, and what we thought was void becomes vision. What we thought was absence becomes encounter. What we feared was ending becomes beginning. The loneliness that once felt like exile becomes holy ground. The pain that once felt like punishment becomes pure. And the silence that once felt unbearable becomes the space where eternity breathes. So what do we do with this? We stay, we surrender, we sanctify our loneliness. We stop fighting the silent sand to begin listening to it. We stop numbing the acan to begin honoring it. We stop running from the wilderness and begin walking through it with reverence. You will carry something the world cannot give and therefore cannot take away, because this is where transformation lives. In the hidden, in the humbled, in the holy ordinary. You do not need to be seen by the world to be held by God. You do not need to be understood by others to be known by the one who made you. Becomes not the end of the story, but the secret place where the author writes your true beginning. You do not need to be strong to be sacred. All you need is willingness. Willingness to trust the silence, to walk through the ache. You will have eyes trained by silence to see stars where others see nothing. To believe that your loneliness is not your enema but your midwife. It is birthing something. It is preparing something. It is shaping you for something that shallow places could never form. And one day, when you emerge from the wilderness, a deeper strength, a quieter joy, an unshakable purpose, and when others are drowning in noise, you will carry the power of stillness. When others are chasing applause, you will walk in the confidence of divine approval. When others are afraid of the dark, because loneliness, embraced and sanctified,